Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning. Welcome to Wacana Nusantara series organized by Institute of Borneo Studies, UNIMAS. We are pleased to see many of you are here today. Within our midst today, we have UNIMAS top brass who are also here. Bala, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research, Professor Siti Nolinda, she is here. And then Deputy Vice Chancellor of Academics and Internationalization, Professor Dr. Fitri Suraya. They are also here to welcome all of you who are coming to our event today. We have just a brief introduction about our institute, Institute of Borneo Studies. The director of the institute is here, Professor Poline Bala. Many of you know her, right? Okay. So our institute have a Nusantara team within the institute, and the Nusantara team actually covers the coastal communities as well as the regional Nusantara in our research field. So the first we have it has been established since 1993. Am I correct? In 1993. Nusantara chair has been established there, and we have a succession of prominent scholars leading the chair. Some of them are Professor Michael Lee, who's there, Professor Abdul Halim Ali, and then we also have Datuk Sanif, who was also a former chair of Nusantara. Today we are pleased to welcome our prominent speaker, Professor Khairudin Aljunied, from National University of Singapore. He is a prominent scholar in the region when it comes to the history of ideas approach. Now, history of ideas approach is it's not a recent approach, but in the context of Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Borneo, this is a very important and key approach. And Professor Khairudin is the leading scholar in the field. He has written books on Islam, on Malay intellectuals, Muslim intellectuals, as well as the nationalist, not quite nationalist, what do we call that? Political movement, yeah? Anti-colonial political movement, all of these utilizing the intellectual history approach, something which is quite new to us here, and therefore we are pleased to introduce you to that discourse, and we are pleased to welcome Professor Khairudin. If you may very kind to come to the sit here, and then the director of the institute, Professor Poline, if you can, take your seat. So the format of our discussion is a presentation, but from our yesterday, Professor Khairudin was in UNIMAS, and he adopted a engaging approach, a very dynamic approach to his lecture. So please feel free to ask any question to him during his lecture, I believe. I can assure you, he's a very kind, good man. He never takes things too hard. I can guarantee that based on my interaction yesterday. I'm sure that is who he is as a scholar and as a man. So I shall now pass the session to you, Professor Pugara. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Chairperson of the session today. And again, welcome to our session, very important session, as mentioned by Dr. Sharifa. It may look small, but do not despise the small beginning of new things or big things coming to our show. So we are very grateful that you made time to come. I don't need to introduce because our chairperson has introduced. We are very grateful that you made time to come to Sarawak. And this is not his first visit, but yes, this is your third visit. And he is here with his family too. Right? So we are very welcome. So we are very fortunate to have you here with us. As mentioned by Dr. Sharifa, he's a prominent scholar in the history of ideas, and as mentioned, it's something that we would really like to get into our show so that we can begin to talk, we have something, we have a dimension or perspective to talk about our culture, our history here in Sarawak. Right, so we also welcome those who are with us online. We have the Zoom link, so for those who are not able to join us physically, they are joining us online. So, and also for those of us here, you can share the Zoom link with others to be able to join us online. Alright, so I think without much further ado, let us welcome our speaker for this morning.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and good morning, everyone. Respected guests, our Deputy TNC who was with me yesterday, although she's an engineer, but she was also contributing to the very interesting historical discussions that we had yesterday. As Pauline was mentioning, this is my third time coming to Sarawak, second time coming to this library. I'm always very impressed by Sarawak because it is not as busy as Singapore, but it is far more romantic a place for anyone who wants a little bit of peace and serenity. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is actually a continuation from our discussions yesterday, which is to underline the importance of us looking at Borneo, and more specifically Sarawak, from a different point of view. And when I say a different point of view, I'm not saying that this point of view has not been explored before, but that this point of view needs to be underlined and given more critical attention for us to place Sarawak within this whole studies of Asia, Southeast Asia, and more importantly of Borneo. Now, the title of my presentation today, can I control this thing from here? No, you can't, so I'll just say next. Okay. So the title of my presentation today, and as I mentioned to the group yesterday, because we had students, and as you all know, for those people who have children, I have 6 of them from the age of 24 to 10 years old, that young people today, including old people as well, they don't actually listen to you for more than 15 minutes. So I have, as I mentioned yesterday, the 15-5 formula, where I will speak for 15 minutes, and then I will have a discussion for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go on until the end. And I think this is far more productive in the age of Instagram and Facebook. And more importantly, I think the point of this whole series of lectures that we have had for the last 2 days is to have conversations and discourses, rather than an expert coming in telling the audience what he or she knows. I rather, and this is what we are doing now in Singapore, a kind of 360 discussion amongst us. So what I'm going to share with you today is this whole idea of Sarawak in global history. Next, and I'm going to go on 3 different directions. Next slide. Yeah, so what I want to do today is to talk about the very philosophical question that we all ask as historians. And even though I've been practicing history for quite a while now, I've been in NUS for 20 years now and been a student of history for more than 20 plus years, we need to begin first with the question, why are we studying history? Because history is not a novelty today. And of course, when I started my PhD in the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, there was once when I was at a mosque, and this man was just asking me, young guy, was asking me during the month of Ramadan, so what are you doing here in London? And I said, I'm doing my PhD. Oh, he said, engineering? No. Medicine? No. What are you doing, brother? He said, and I told him, I'm doing a PhD in history. So he said to me, what are you going to eat when you graduate? So that's how devalued history has been. So I want to begin with this because it is very, very important for us to, in a sense, underscore the importance of history now. If Francis Fukuyama wrote this very iconic book called The Last Man and the End of History, I want to make the argument that history has just begun again, especially in the very connected world that we are in today. So we'll begin with that. Then I want to talk about the history of Sarawak as against the global hemisphere, the waves of Sarawak global past, why Sarawak, even if you look at the history a long time ago, has always been, in a sense, globalized. Of course, the word global didn't exist in the past of globalization, but if you look at the evidences that are presented to us, we can make some tentative conclusions that there were a lot of global linkages in Sarawak itself. And then I'm going to end with talking about some lessons. So just prepare this morning, some lessons for our time. What can we learn basically from this history? So I'm not only going to look backwards, but we will try to use history to look forward in time. What can the Institute of Colonial Studies do? What can the library, National Library of Sarawak, do with these histories that we have in our midst? So just to begin next with history, why we study history. I want to begin with a few quotes. Next slide. The first is actually the quote by Ibn Khaldun. I'm actually writing a book right now with Polity Press in the UK, and the title of the book is quite ambitious, and that's why it's so difficult to write. How do you change, or how do we change the Islamic civilization? Because my specialization is basically on Islam in Southeast Asia and the Islamic civilization as a whole. And now I'm interested in the theory of change. Why do civilizations change? Not only Islam, but all civilizations. And why do some civilizations, especially the Islamic civilizations, refuse to change? And Ibn Khaldun has a very powerful quote where he said, "The past resembles the future more than one drop of water resembles another." So what he's saying basically here is that in us trying to see a break between the past and the present and the future, by seeing this break between the past and the present and the future, we are missing a lot of things. A lot of what has happened in the past can repeat in the present and in the future. Now, historians, especially professional historians, are very, very suspicious of such conception of the past. Because for most historians, they will always say, do not commit the fallacy of presentism. What is presentism? To use the present as a judgment of how people behave or societies function in the past. But the point I'm trying to drive here, and this is agreed upon in all historical studies, that there are a lot of things that we can derive from our experience in the past. Our failures, our successes, our achievements, and our failings are the things that we need to derive from the past. Next slide. And of course, there is another saying by Confucius, for those who know, Confucius, who said that by three methods we will learn wisdom. And when Confucius talked about wisdom, he says that historical wisdom is one of the lessons that we can learn from our time. He says, first, by reflection, that we can only derive wisdom from histories when we don't read histories only as events. And this is again the problem that we have. The historian Fernand Braudel divides histories into three different zones of time. He calls it as the history of events, which to him is the basic idea of history. And then the history of structures, because structures sometimes last longer than events. So events may change. The library may have one director after another, and that's an event, but the structure itself may persist. But Braudel says that that is what he calls as the longer duration. And the longer duration, according to him, is the history of the environment. The environment will stay with us, even if people change, even if events change, and even if structures come and go. And Confucius basically underlined this point again, and he says that we need to reflect upon the past. Reflecting upon the past means that we will need to look at the past from the perspective of ideas, not only from the perspective of things and objects. We must derive from the past philosophies of life that we can learn from. Hence, back to Ibn Khaldun, history, according to Ibn Khaldun, is a branch of philosophy. So I want to begin with this one. Second, he says, we can learn wisdom by way of imitation, what we have from the past. We imitate and we improve. And last but not least, according to him, the easiest way to learn wisdom is through experience. Those who do not learn from the past will always repeat it. Right? And to him, when you learn from experience, it is the bitterest lesson in life. Right? If you don't learn from the past, you will repeat the same mistake in the past that you have done in the past, and it's going to be bitter than what you realize. Then go on to the next slide. And of course, I want to link this whole profession of history to this big canvas called
global history. So one book that I would recommend, a very good introduction to global history, is by Pamela Crossley, who talks about the importance of global history in our time. Now, talking about global history doesn't mean that we deny the importance of the local. Rather, the whole project of global history is about taking the local into sharp focus and to connect it to global developments in order for us to understand why local sensibilities, senses, societies, sensitivities change in time. And this is the whole point of global history. That the whole point of global history is to look at long-term trends and to connect specific localities such as Sarawak, Sabah, Brunei, Borneo, Southeast Asia to the rest of the world. And it is about looking at life beyond our specific context. Whether we realize it or not, if we look at the way in which we dress, it is a reflection of globality or globalism or globalization. We are wearing, as myself, an Arab man whose mother is Indian and who's wearing a Western made shirt and a Japanese made watch, Seiko by the way. We are all intermixed. Turkish made shoes. The Turkish make very good leather shoes and they are very cheap also at the same time. We are all very globalized. So the whole project of global history is about making us realize that whether we like it or not, whether we are clubbing, as my friend Poline here is, living in the highlands, or what they call as the Ulu, or whether we are Melanau, staying in the downstream of the river, or whether we are Iban, or whether we are Melayu, we are all globalized. And this is the big point. And this is the challenge for the Sarawakian scholars here. That when we talk about heritage, and I experienced this because my family is from Penang in Malaysia, whenever they talk about heritage, they always say that heritage is local, heritage is unique, heritage is peculiar. We are special. We are special to the point that we are special in regard to other people. We are not special in regard to our own self. Archaeology says things don't exist only in situ of another. Any artifact has to be understood with other artifacts that may have produced it or come with it. And that's why even when you look at archaeology, archaeology in itself is not a local escapade or a local pursuit. All archaeological work will always say that there are materials that are found in certain societies, and I'm going to go through that later on, that may come from another society, especially when you talk about Sarawak. So now let's move on then to Sarawak. So I want to begin with this big thing, why we must learn history. For those who don't like history when they were in secondary school, I'm trying to bring it back to your senses. But I want to now talk about Sarawak. So next slide. So now I want to talk about the waves of Sarawak global past. But before I get into that, my 15 minutes is up. Can I get questions first? Very unconventional, eh? Most people would stop halfway, but let's do that.
Any question? Yes.
It's not a question, it's a comment. I don't see how you can learn wisdom by imitation, because you can imitate something that is not wise.
Right. So that's why he said that you must reflect first. You must first reflect by what you receive, and then you imitate if it is relevant for you. The levels that Confucius was talking about is basically the highest level of learning wisdom is to reflect upon what you take. The second level is to imitate, and that's the so-called, at least to him, the inferior level. And the third is to learn wisdom through experience. Imitation is not a bad thing, as you can see from cars. Most of the cars that are produced by the Japanese, the Koreans, were imitations of what Ford had produced. But now the Japs are producing the best cars. If you go to the US, everybody wants a Honda, not other cars. So the point here that Confucius is trying to underline in regard to history is that at the end of the day, people learn in many different ways. And learning through imitation is an inferior way in comparison to people who learn through reflection and improvement. Okay, good point. Anyone else?
Yes.
Does history have value? For instance, secular history or history imbued with sacred meaning.
Yeah, okay. Firstly, history don't have value when you are teaching in the university. Yeah, because the student numbers are decreasing now, especially in the arts and social sciences. I'm sad to say that that value has gone away. So that's why I'm trying to argue for the history, for the importance of history, both in the academe and in public. When you decide to be a professional historian, especially in the universities, you are amongst the lowest paid. In the US, religious studies and history are put together as the lowest paid academics, right? But again, when you talk about secular and religious history, now this dichotomy between the secular and the religious is very, very problematic. There is a very good book, yesterday we were talking about a lot of books, today I will give you more books, by this scholar by the name of Talal Asad. Talal Asad is an American scholar, and he wrote a beautiful book called Genealogies of the Secular, right? And in that book, he compared Islam, Christianity, and other Judaic traditions, and showed that this division between secular and sacred is a creation of the Enlightenment, taken in by scholars that came later on. In reality, according to Talal Asad, and now a lot of scholars, Elizabeth Hurd and other scholars, Sabah Mahmood, are now arguing that in the lives that we are living in, this division don't actually exist. I was just going to come here and I want to live in this hotel, and somebody told me that don't live there because it's haunted, right? And I think these haunting stories, I lived in Brunei for a year, these ghost stories is almost everywhere in the whole of Brunei, right? Is that circular? Is that sacred? It's somewhere in between, right? The sacred, people talk about ghosts because they want some shaman to come in and throw away the ghost, has, according to Talal Asad, the sacred and the secular are always mutually constituting one another, which means that in our lives, sometimes, even when we claim that we are utterly sacred, we behave almost like secular people. And sometimes when we say that we are utterly secular, we still pay deference to the sacred, especially when we lose something. Oh my God. Right? When we lost something, oh my God, where did I put it? Hey, wait, I'm secular. I'm a free thinker. Right? And even when we, as religious people who so-called say that we are pious religious people, we still do things that secular people do. And this is the point. Right? So we need to understand that this division that was there, especially in the academe, in the height of modernization theory in the 1960s, is somehow now seen as passé, or things that people don't take in anymore. And I belong to this new wave of scholarship that is now making the point in my new book that's going to come out next year in February on Sufism, that this division that we have created and constructed is no longer relevant anymore. The secular and the sacred are flowing into one another. Last one. Anybody? Okay, everybody looks a bit worried. Am I secular? Am I sacred? Is there ghosts? Right? Okay, so that's that. I want to begin with a high note on the importance of history, the importance of global history, and why Sarawak history has always been globalized. So now let's talk about Sarawak a little bit. And I know when I do this, I'm entering into the crocodile farm. Why I say the crocodile farm? Because banyak buaya, and some of them will bite me now. So he's talking about Sarawak, he doesn't actually know about Sarawak. But don't worry, I'm just going to paint it in very broad strokes, so nobody will bite me too much. But what I want to do now is to say that there are certain phases in Sarawak history that we need to be attentive to, and that these phases are actually overlapping with one another. One problem that we have in historians studying Sarawak history is that they look at it from the perspective of ruptures, breaks. It's almost that something happened in this point in time, and then something new happened, and whatever happened in the times before somehow fade away. I'm gonna make the first argument that when we talk about waves, macam laut atau sungai, that things flow into one another, right? So next slide. So when we look at Sarawak history, we need to understand that Sarawak history has gone very far back. The mistake that a lot of Sarawakian historians have done, and in fact the historians of Southeast Asia as a whole, is to imagine that with the coming of the colonial rulers or the colonial powers, that's when real history starts. Before that, it's just legends, myths, and cerita-cerita dongeng, as they say. But now, archaeologists, whether Western or local, have said that Sarawak has a very long history that goes back to 65,000 years. Whichever scientific results you want to believe in terms of the dating of all these artifacts, it is clear that the findings in the Nia caves, I've not been there myself, and I would like to see, especially the discovery of human skulls, of various artifacts, tell us that there was a flourishing civilization, even if they used to live in caves. Now, I've mentioned this yesterday, that whenever people talk about people in the highlands, there is this term that Western sociologists, anthropologists, ethnographers used to use in the past. They call them primitive societies. One historian by the name of Eric Hobsbawm wrote something about this, that the whole idea of primitivism is in itself very problematic. Why? Because it assumes a stage theory of society, that we were once primitive, moving to so-called archaic way of life, moving to feudalism, modernism, and then now the advanced industrial society. Many historians are now saying that all of these stage theories don't actually apply in human life, as simple as many Western developmentalist theories had it in the past. Civilizations in the past, and especially if you look at Sarawak civilization, in these times, had shown certain advances in the ways of life in which they were in. And these can be seen in the tools that they use, in the production of pots and porcelains. They didn't have gadgets like we have right now, but at least they had a longer attention span. So who is more primitive? The people 65,000 years ago, where they talk to each other like human beings, or the people now who are staying in the same house and you are messaging your daughter when you are in the kitchen? Right? Who is primitive now? So looking at it from that perspective tells us that Sarawak's long history shows to us that a civilization in the Paleolithic age was already a testimony of Sarawak's advancement as a civilization. So we need to register that first. These findings, even though they may be very sketchy, and archaeology is always problematic because archaeology is not history. Archaeology gives you snapshots of things in order to make general conclusions of what was there in the past. History is like a film where you watch and see what happens in the past. The difference between that is that one gives you a generalization informed by snippets, the other one gives you a story informed by a large so-called accumulation of sources. Still, whichever position we want to take, whether the archaeological or the historical, it is clear that Sarawak had a long civilization. Now that has philosophical implication on history. What it tells us is that the longer your history is, the deeper your identity will be, right? So this is why so many societies out there, especially Arab societies, they want to claim that, oh, if you have 65,000 years, we have 125,000 years. Because the longer back you go, the more you can tell your stories. The more stories you can tell, going back to the question by the lady just now, the more you can reflect. The more you can take wisdoms from it. And Sarawak must underline this first, that this is the first wave. Next. But then, of course, we move to the 8th and the 14th century. The work by Professor Syed underlines the importance of Santubong. We had a discussion yesterday on what the word Santubong actually means. And I'm going to talk about it later. But more importantly, Santubong was a port city, at least, now called a Negeri, which I don't really agree with the terminology, that was a flourishing state in itself. Again, we don't have much information on this, My critique of Professor Sanet, even though it's a brilliant piece of work in trying to piece together all of these sources, is that it is still reliant on a master document, which is the Hikayat, that was written very late, basically in history, to push back the story back to the beginning. That's my critique of that work. But what is notable about Professor Sanet's work is to make the argument of an integrative form of history, a history that brings together myth and legends, historical facts, and also archaeological findings together to build an argument that there was this civilization called Santubong. Now, Santubong, according to Professor Sanet Syed, berdirinya sebuah negara di Kuala Santubong, negeri di Kuala Santubong, bermula dengan pengembaraan Raden Adipati Sari. What's interesting about Santubong is that it is very much connected with Java, right? It was built and it was destroyed also by way of the Javanese influence in the region. That gives us another indication that the history of Sarawak must not be divorced from the history of what we call today Indonesia and the history of all the connected islands around it. Because we know from the artifacts in Santubong, there were a lot of stuff that was discovered there. From the archaeological findings alone, we know that there were connections between Vietnam and Cambodia. In the northern zone, in the western zone, there was a lot of relationship with Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, especially the sultanates that were rising. There were a lot of exchanges with Sulu and Visaya in the eastern zone. In the southern zone, it was a lot of connection with Sulawesi, Maluku Islands, and in the central zone of Santubong, we know that there were connections with the heart of Borneo. And especially in Kalimantan areas, the indigenous peoples were traveling across the Borneo island. And this is clear if you look at the artifacts. What are the artifacts that we are talking about that tells us all this? There were a lot of Chinese ceramics, which only goes to show wherever you go in the world, there will be a Chinatown. Right? There's nowhere in the world where there's no Chinatown. Right? Even when you go to New York. Chinese have been here, even the early history of Singapore now. Singapore is trying to push back its history to 700 years, to the time of Sang Nila Utama. And they found that when Sang Nila Utama was there were a lot of Chinese porcelain and even jewelry. So the Chinese have been everywhere. The interesting thing about the Chinese in comparison to the Malays, wherever they go, they always say that they were Waranga. Right? The Arabs call them Sin. Right? The people are Sunni, people who are Chinese. There were a lot of artifacts in Santubong called an iron slug, which is 40 tons heavy, a big iron thing that shows some kind of worship, and a big Hindu temple. So a lot of Hindu artifacts. When you have Hindu artifacts there, it shows that there were a lot of movement from India all the way to Sarawak and back. I just came back from Perlis 3 weeks ago, and even in Perlis, they found a kind of litany for the monks to read their litanies, zikir we call it in Malay, and they found these artifacts in the caves of Perlis, which shows also the movement from India to China, into the heart of Southeast Asia, to the Malay Peninsula, into Sarawak. Now what's interesting here, the fact that this Hindu temple is huge, and the fact that there's so many artifacts that were left, we can also make some tentative conclusions that the Hindus did not come here only to spread religion, but also to teach the religion. The work by O.W. Walters on the mandalas, on early Southeast Asia, only goes to show that Buddhism, the center of Buddhism, was also based in the Sri Vijaya kingdom. And that the Buddhists made Southeast Asia, I want to make the tentative conclusion that Sarawak was one of those places, into the heart of Buddhist learning. So very interesting, if you look at the Santubong thing, for those people here who are interested in the Santubong, Negeri Santubong, I hope that you will broach into the subject even more. We need to look at Arab sources, because the Arabs were traveling even before the coming of Islam. We also need to look at a lot of these Chinese and Persian sources that have been relatively neglected because nobody likes Iran now. But we have to look into the sources. And of course, other archaeological sites in Sarawak can be found in Kapit. I don't know where this place is and I want to go there. Song, Serian, and Bau districts. right? This is the problem with us historians, right? So we don't learn from experience, we learn from books, we know where the place is on the map, we've not been there yet. And of course, to give credit to Professor Sanif, he gives a new reading of Hikayat Datuk Merpati and read it in a totally different way on how his relatives from Java came to Sarawak. Santubong was an important port until the decline of the Yuan dynasty, and then it was deserted during the time of the Ming dynasty. Now, what's interesting about the story of Santubong is that it became a magnet of so many different communities. That's why, with this success of Santubong, Sarawak now has a diverse population of not only indigenous people, but peoples from the outside. Of course, indigenous, we know that the Dayaks, the Kanawit, the Adang, the Livong, the Raik, Tabun, Bidayu, and so forth and so forth. But more importantly, why Chinese and Indians and Malays are here, although they are not local, has to do with the Santubong miracle, in a sense. I call it Santubong miracle because it came out of nowhere, it developed so powerfully, and then it just disappeared. Somebody call it the lost kingdom of Santubong. I was mentioning yesterday, it's not lost. It's just like any ordinary kingdom in the past. It comes and it goes, right? And Santubong ended its story in the 16th century. So we come to the next phase, to the time of, so again, I just want to mention this. Yesterday we had a discussion about this. What is the meaning of Santubong? And one professor, Jonah, I think she mentioned it, it's very powerful. Chuna, very powerfully, that the word Santubong actually means coffin. Masuk keranda, you come to Santubong and you die. Interesting, the word coffin is also used in Yemen, where my family is from. Where we are from, it's called Hadramaut. Hadramaut in Arabic means the presence of death. Who wants to be in a place where there is the presence of death? But everybody went to the valley of Hadramaut because you don't go there because you want to die. You go there because death is seen by the Hadramis as the beginning of life. So it's a different cosmology altogether. And yesterday when they were mentioning it, again, so similar, right? The Ibans regard the word Santubong as coffin, and coffin doesn't imply that the place is dead. Because when someone dies, I don't know whether it's any Iban person here, the time of death is the beginning of life. And this is actually very Islamic too. In Islam, death is the beginning, not the end. This life is actually the end of a beginning, right? So they are saying that it is a metaphor for people coming together. Because when people die, when someone dies, everybody comes and relatives now meet each other. The relatives that you never met before, the friends that you never met before, comes to the coffin called Santubong. So she was saying to us yesterday, quite scarily saying it, maybe Santubong means coffin. Right? I said no. It is a metaphor, just like Hadramaut. Santubong basically means a meeting place, a conduit. Right? An argument that Sanif did not make, but it's something that I want to throw up in the air. Because we need to understand the terminology from the perspective of the indigenous peoples. And this is the problem with our history. The problem with our history is that we impose concepts from the outside. Or we impose certain ideological and instrumental ideas of looking at history and try to interpret history from the perspective of an outsider. And to see it from the insider is to see the significance of the word in the local society, which means coffin. So any Iban people here? Zero Iban? Okay, that's not a good sign. There must be one Iban. So maybe you can be the one who looks into this coffin thing. But I think I'm half correct to say that actually it means a place in between. In Persian, it's called dihliz. Dihliz basically means threshold, right? To be at the interstices of something, right? And this is what it means. Next slide. And of course, we come with the end of Santubong with the Brunei Sambas phase. 300 years under the Brunei Empire. Now, what's interesting about the Brunei Empire, for those who have lived in Brunei before, is that The Brunei Empire always claimed that it is big and huge and it is an empire. It was not. Right? It was not an empire. There was no empires really in the Malay world as we understand empires in the modern sense, or in the Ottoman sense, or in the Mughal sense, worse off in the American and the British and the French sense of the word. There were no territorial empires in Southeast Asia. All so-called large kingdoms in Southeast Asia were maritime kingdoms. Most kings did not know the borders of their kingdoms. As I mentioned yesterday, when they asked the king of Aceh or Johor what is the length of their so-called empire, their answer would be in as far as my eye can see, in as far as the bird would fly, depending on which bird. Right? So because of this, when we look at the Brunei phase of Sarawak, we should not commit the mistake of thinking that it was a colonization of an Islamic kingdom over a non-Islamic terrain. There was no such thing. The reason has to do with the fact, and I argue in my book Islam in Malaysia, that Islam did not impose its values and norms over Borneo. Rather, it flowed naturally into the society, such that the society could accept it as part and parcel of its cultural complex. So that's why when the Bruneian so-called kingdom grew in the 16th century, Brunei did not administer Sarawak directly. Sarawak was administered by the four Datus after the death of Sultan Tengah Manggar, and the four Datus were actually people who were based in Sambas, which was another island in Kalimantan. Why did the Brunei Sultan let people in Kalimantan manage Sarawak? That's such a very confusing thing to do. The reason has to do with the fact that the Sultan of Brunei, successive Sultan of Brunei, understood that the Sarawakians wanted to be ruled by people who understood their culture. Biar mati anak, jangan mati adat. Let the children die, don't let the adat be sacrificed. The understanding of adat by the Islamic kingdoms had it that they cannot be managed by force. Rather, they should be managed by compromise. The way to manage them by compromise is to send people whom they could understand. The British then learned this. The British learned when they were colonizing the Malays that you cannot manage the Malays directly. You need to manage the Malays through the Malay rulers. That's how you manage them. What we call now as management by proxy. So if you want your lecturers to work better, the dean don't go to the lecturers. Get someone else to do the job for you. Now from the 18th to the 19th century, the Brunei Sultanate was severely weakened, and that means that the whole Santubong complex that was there also lost its luster. So again, Negeri Santubong did not die or did not end in the 14th century. Negeri Santubong had a different permutation under the Brunei Empire. The Bruneians did not let it grow as it would have been, because it would have overlapped or overshadowed the significance of Brunei, but Santubong actually persisted. And that's why the name Santubong, which became Mount Santubong, was not effaced. This is something that people don't see. Why? Because historians always see things in breaks. Bruneians came, finished Santubong. No, there was still this Negeri Santubong. But the Negeri Santubong took an entirely new shape. So I'm going to stop here first. Question and answers. Before we get to the modern period, which is very, very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what sort of a language the people in Brunei and the local community communicate when they rule, because the first time you want to rule, you need is there a requirement for written rules? Or is there so much of language? Is it Arabic, or is it I don't know as much about language?
Yeah, so yesterday we were talking about this. If you read the book by Leonard Andaya, and the title of the book, Leaves of the Same Tree, Leaves of the Same Tree, and the book by Anthony Milner, called The Malays. They talk about these linguistic worlds that were there. There were three kinds of languages that were spoken. Three kinds of languages. First, the local dialect. That was never taken away. Right? Wherever you go, Kelabit, Iban, they will speak the local dialects. When I studied a little bit about Sarawak, even the local dialect has sub-dialects. So Melanau in this part and Melanau in that part speak different dialects. So that's the first. The second language is what they call as the administrative language. Because kings don't talk the language of the market. The kings had their own courtly languages. The language of, later on, we call it the language of adab. The language of adab. Right? So second. But the third one, which is the concern of Dian and Andaya, is the language of trade. The language of the markets. The lingua franca. The language that you talk so that everybody can understand you. Because in Malacca, in the 14th century, according to Thomas Paris, there were 87 languages that were spoken in the markets. People were talking in different languages among each other. But one language prevailed. And that language is Malayaw. Chinese say Malayaw. But the local word is called Malayu, which became Melayu. Not the Melayu that we understand now. Saya ni sekarang cakap bahasa Melayu, not that kind of Melayu. But the Melayu that had concepts that were drawn by so many different cultures. And that's why, as I was mentioning yesterday, the Melayu that we know today is a conglomerate of 4 to 5 languages. Saya mahu makan. Saya mahu makan. Everybody can understand this, right? Saya is from where? Sanskrit. Saya. Hamba sahaya. Mahu is Old Malay. One lady yesterday was saying, oh, that's not Old Malay, that's Austronesian. Okay, I take that. Right? We call it Old Malay, she calls it Austronesian. Oh, and it's quite the same thing. Makan. Makan is a bit contentious. Right? Where is makan from? Makan means eat. It cannot be from Arabic. Arabic don't say eat, akala, akul. We don't say eat, makan. Makan in Arabic, makan means makan means place. Right? So what is makan? Where is makan from? Now we have a debate. It could be from Sanskrit, it could be from Old Malay. The point I'm trying to make here is that because of this trade language that was developed, Malay is actually like English. The English people didn't have language. Sorry to say, if there's any Englishmen here. English is a language that was taken partly from their nomadic tradition, but mostly from their interactions with the Germanic tribes, with the Franco tribes, and more importantly with Greek and Latin. And it's the same. That's why when the British came to this part of the world, oh yeah man, this looks like my place back home. Especially the Scottish. They loved it here. Because they realized that the Malays were good at bringing things together, especially in terms of language. They could appropriate it, use it, and it became the language of the people on the ground, such that everyone can understand Malay. Malay is the easiest language to learn, because it has so many languages in it. Okay, another question? Yeah.
Is there a translation of the book Negeri Santubong?
Translation of no. So I don't think we have a translation of the book Negeri Santubong. So maybe IPS may want to consider this if it's possible, or maybe the library may want to consider this. But I think there is, from my point of view, there is a need to write another book. I think the book is a good book, but we need to have another piece of scholarship that talks about the Santubong idea in a more advanced manner. And it can be done actually, because I think Professor Salim has already given us a grounding to work from, and it's very notable, but somebody must move forward with it. One problem that we have in the Malay world is that when someone does something, nobody else wants to do another thing to challenge it.
Can I mention, there is an article, I think, in one of the journals Khabib also contributed. They're looking at Santubong from different perspectives. Of course, you have the scientists that came to study the flora and the fauna. There's also, you have anthropologists giving interpretation of how different indigenous people look at Santubong. For instance, you have then you have the Vidayu look at Santubong as the means for way the death, the spirit of the death lands in Santubong before they get into the other world. So there are scientists have look at the like exactly like what you mentioned yesterday, to get scientists and the social scientists to work together on a particular place and then look at it from different perspectives. So there are articles, I think in one of the particular journals that IBAC has produced.
Yeah. But I think more than that, we need people to challenge whatever that is there. Now, one problem that we have in Southeast Asia, and this is where I prefer sometimes, not all the time, I even criticize scholarship in the West. In the West, you can criticize anybody and everybody, right? And it's celebrated as part and parcel of academic life. In Southeast Asia, whenever you challenge one big scholar, especially if he's already 80 years old or 86, oh, ni derhaka, right? How dare you challenge this top guru? And I think it is not going to help us. So I strongly recommend that we use Professor Sanik's work as a base to work from, to criticize, to develop, to build, in order for us to have a deeper understanding of our history. I think I should buy a house in Sarawak. Is there any more questions? Yeah.
You said there's no empire in Southeast Asia.
Right.
Is there civilization?
Of course, civilization has always been there. There's a very interesting collection of articles by this professor called Muhammad Taib Osman, who was the Vice Chancellor of University Malaya when Poline was doing her undergrad. And Professor Taib Osman put together a very interesting book called The Malay Civilization. He used the word Malay in a very broad sense to say that the whole idea of civilization, Arabic for tamadun, has always been there. Again, Fernand Braudel has this good book called Civilization, where he contested the word civilization itself. He says that the word civilization came about in the 18th century and introduced by the French to mark out the difference between the French and others. The French are always civilized, right? Except during elections. But he says that as a terminology, it is useful for us to think about achievements of a particular group of people and societies. And these achievements must be at the level where it can be seen as notable and, more importantly, path-breaking. And I would say that Sarawak, if you look at the history very, very carefully, had a lot of path-breaking achievements. And one of the path-breaking achievements is that so many different tribes could live together in peace. Not denying that there were wars between tribes. But if you look at the history of Southeast Asia, especially of the Borneo region, in comparison to the history of Europe, in terms of wars and conflicts, we don't have 100 years war. The Europeans invented 100 years war. Well, how can you fight for 100 years? Don't worry, the Europeans can do it. We don't fight for 100 years. We don't have a world war. We didn't cause the World War I and the World War II. The World War killed 55 million people in the second instance and maybe like 25 million people in the first instance. When we talk about war in Southeast Asia, 7,000 people died and they were fighting in the middle of a given terrain. And that's it. It's finished, have a settlement and life move on. Right? So again, one of the major civilizational traits of Southeast Asia is the emphasis on perpaduan and also peace. Keselamatan, which I want to use word. I do not know the Kalabit word for peace. I was talking about this with the lady yesterday, but peace is always the thing that is talked about in Southeast Asian societies, especially in Sarawak society. That's why if you want to understand the Malays, the Sarawakians, the Ibans and others, you don't look at what they talk about. You look at their silence. How people look at each other. Right? They don't like each other. So what they do? Give you the temple. Right? In the European, in the Arabian society, if I don't like you, I tell you I don't like you. I'm not going to stick with you. But in the Iban society and in the Melanau society, saya tak suka dia, tapi tak apa, duduk sama-sama. I know what to do with you. Can I move on? Alright. So then that leads us to the next slide, to the modern day thing. And we cannot forget this man. He's always appearing again and again. He is like the phantom, the ghost who walks everywhere you go. Because if you go to the National Library, this is a Brookian legacy. Many people look at colonialism as a boon and a bane. right? But the reality is that in us criticizing colonial rule, we must also know that colonialism, and in my book Islam in Malaysia, brought about a lot of developments in Southeast Asia. If not for the colonial powers and anti-colonialists, decolonialists would be very angry with me, we would not have a university in Southeast Asia. Scholars such as Christopher Bailey and even post-colonial scholars in Southeast Asia are now saying that what the colonial powers did was to destroy local societies in some ways and to build them in other ways. And the Brooks, in as much as they were resisted by Iban leaders such as Rentak, right? Everybody knows Rentak, and that young man, Rosli, is it his name? Rosli Lobin, who stabbed the colonial ruler. He stabbed the colonial ruler because he wanted the British to stay. That was the reason why he stabbed the ruler, because the British wanted to leave and he wanted the British to stay. That was the reason for the assassination, which only goes to show that when the British came into this part of the world, the British were, for the lack of a better term, but it is a scholarly term, gentlemanly imperialists. They rule over you in a manner that you will love it. That's why when they asked Gandhi, what do you think of democracy and even European enlightenment, Gandhi said it is a very good idea. Right? What he means by that is that the Europeans always give us good things in terms of ideas, bad things in terms of implementation. If they give you $1, they're going to take $7 from you. And that was what the Brooks did. The Brooks, in their short term in Sarawak, and of course their impact is felt in the rest of Borneo from 1841 to 1946. In as much as the locals didn't like them, the locals worked together with the Brooks to link Sarawak more than ever before. Right? The Bruneians did their job. Santubong Negeri created a connected society, but with the introduction of modern infrastructures, Sarawak developed its own pan-Sarawak identity. So people start moving from their local and their dialectical or dialect-based identities to a more Sarawak-based identity. And that was the legacy of the Brooks. We must thank them for coming here. It was a tragedy in many ways, but what they did was to enhance the Santubong ideal. So this is the other thing about the British that people don't understand, and someone like me who did a PhD in Britain understood. It is that when the British colonized societies, they studied that society from its language to its ways of living. I repeat, from its language to its ways of living, how people love things. The British were empiricists par excellence. And that's why you have Hugh Clifford, John Crawford, Hugh Lowe, and all these people who studied Malay societies, right? And loved it with a passion to a point of having mistresses of their own, who were Malays. You all know this, right? The British colonial residents always had a local mistress. What is it about Malay women? I don't know. Right? I married one of them, but certainly they loved local societies in as much as they colonized it. What they did was to revive Sarawak into becoming a maritime hub. If Brunei wanted Sarawak to only be a strategic outpost, the Brooks said no. Sarawak is going to be the hub. And this is what they did. They used the natural resources that was there, timber, and introduced rubber, later on oil and gas, and turn it into a place where there is a critical economic interest. When the Brooks left, and this is the final phase that I'm going to talk about before I talk about the lessons of history, what they did was to imbibe in local people the awareness of education and heritage conservation. When Raffles came to Malacca and later on to Singapore and in Bengkulu, Malays were giving him everything that they had because Raffles loved collecting stuff from the Malays, and so did the other colonial rulers. All of these things are in the British Museum, the Museum of Thieves. Okay? The British stole everything from the rest of the world and put it in the British Museum, and we, the dumb people, go there to see our artifacts. Right? I'm using this whole idea, the Museum of Thieves, by the British themselves. They're the ones who describe it as the Museum of Thieves, but they conserved our heritage. Thank God for colonialism, right? That's a very controversial thing to say. Luckily, they came and brought it back. If it had been here, what happens? It would have been under the bed of someone, and the thing would have become rotten by now. This is what the colonial powers did. They preserved the heritage of Sarawak, and because of this, there is ongoing preservation of historical sites, the creation of UNIMAS, which is a British legacy, the Sarawak Museum, which I'm going to go right after this, and of course the National Library. The idea of a Kutub Khana, which is a library, only existed in the Arab world, in the Persian world, and the Indian world. The Malays never had a library. There's no conception of library in the Malay world before the British came. And this is the fault of the Muslims that came to this part of the world. They introduced everything but university and libraries. Why? Why? When you say this, the Malays will be very unhappy. Because the idea is that if you want to be educated, go elsewhere, except in your own place. And this was the ideology of the kerajaan of that time. The kerajaans later on changed the ideology later on. I said to the audience yesterday, the past is imperfect. Don't be afraid to criticize the past, because that was the past. That was how it is. The British gave us, of course, the idea of tourism. There was no such thing as tourism. There's no such thing as going to people's country to buy souvenirs. This was a colonial European invention. Now that leads us, the next slide, to the present. Sarawak in the era of nation states, and the next slide. In this era of nation states, we see that Sarawak now, and I'm going to talk about the present, and for those who are policymakers here, leaders of universities, we see that Sarawak now says that by 2030, Sarawak will be a thriving society driven by data and innovation, where everyone enjoys economic prosperity, social inclusivity, and sustainable environment. When I read this 2030 manifesto, it reminds me like my own country, Singapore. This is how we think in Singapore, which basically, in short, we are going to be the best of the best. Because you're talking about first, knowledge, second, sustainability, and third, which is the most important thing to survive, which is a British legacy, you have to make a lot of money. The problem that we have had in many local societies is that money is seen as the root of all evil. The beautiful thing about Sarawak now, with this plan that I have studied a little bit, is that it acknowledges that money is a magnifier of good. You need to have a lot of money in order to help people. If you are poor, and local societies have been rampant with poverty for a long time, you cannot bring Sarawak to a new level. So the new plan that Sarawak has is to develop Sarawak into an economic powerhouse of Malaysia. I don't think they are telling the whole story. They are not going to be the economic powerhouse of Malaysia. They are going to be the economic powerhouse of Asia. Why they are going to be the economic powerhouse of Asia? Because they know that the Nusantara project, the new capital of Indonesia, is in their backyard. 33 billion US dollars will be poured into the Nusantara project in Kalimantan. Before that project ends or is ready, which is like 2036 or maybe even longer, the next hub for Indonesia, for Malaysia, for China is going to be Sarawak. Where are you going to place yourself in this movement? So yesterday, together with the TNC, I said, UNIMAS must be a global university now, not tomorrow. Now, you have to be globalized now. And local communities must realize that it has to transform, they have to transform their lands to ride on the wave of becoming the economic powerhouse of Asia. Next slide. Now, what can we learn from this? Again, let me stand up a little bit because it's getting very hot already, this whole issue. If you look at the plans clearly show that Sarawak knows its history very, very well. I do not know who crafted these plans or whether they spoke to Singapore to also discuss these plans. It seems that there were a lot of conversations, but if you look at it, there's 6 economic sectors and 6 enablers. 7 enablers. The stress here is on the economic sectors. The enablers feeds it, right? What are the economic sectors? Manufacturing, traditional, it has always been there. It's not expanding, they're going to expand it. If you are into engineering, this is your chance. Agriculture, that's already quite, everybody knows this. Tourism, it's already part of Sarawak tourism. The only thing that is limiting Sarawak is tourism means kucing. Correct? And this is what this plan is trying to do. And forestry, which is normal, mining, which is already there, but this is the interesting part. That Sarawak will be the hub of services. What services? Data. They will be the data hub of Southeast Asia. Singapore is a small island without enough land to develop data hubs. Where would be the next hinterland? 1.5 hours flight. Sarawak will be Singapore's next partner to develop the data hub of Asia. Now the enablers now is actually the challenge. So this, we go back to the history. That history shows the reason why Sarawak was so powerful in the past, the Saltubong Negeri and so forth, and under the Brooks was because it became more connected. The world is moving at an increasing rate. It is accelerating beyond what we can imagine. The first thing that Sarawak needs to learn from the past is to be more connected by way of transport. I was told that there will be an LRT or something that's causing the jam right now from Kuching to Samarahan. That's already a good start. The next thing, and I think they will work with Singapore on this, is to develop the Sarawak version of the HSR, the long, fast train from Kuching all the way to Miri. And that's the next plan. Second is innovation. Innovation means you have to have minds. You cannot have innovation when you do not have smart people. And to have that smart people, you need to bring your people back. So I read some news items. They are recalling Sarawakians back. For those of you who have kids in Kuala Lumpur, call them back here. Come here and work. Don't go there and do your thing. And this bringing back of human capital, creating new infrastructure and improving on utilities, digital transformation, tells us that the last wave that we are talking about now shows that Sarawak is moving back into the future by learning about the past. Now, where do we place ourselves in all of this? One, it shows the critical role of historians. Not history for the sake of studying history, but what has been called as applied history. Study the past to tell the policymakers of what they can do for the future. That's number one. Number two is the transformation of the university. The university cannot live or function in silo with society. It has to be in society. And I have been screaming and shouting in Peninsular Malaysia about this. We must have what has been called as the university in society, where the university works together, and it has done so with industries, but more importantly, work with the societies that are deep in the hulu and the hilir. Bring the university there. Bring your students there to educate the communities there. Upscale them. Upscale them through what? Through skills. Because I tell my daughter who just graduated from the university last year, there is no point for you to do a master's and PhD right now. For those doing master's and PhD, it's not that luck. But what is needed right now, and the world wants it, are skills. If you know AI, if you know how to make a website, if you know how to build things, these are the things that the world needs. And we need to get the local communities to be armed by this. So this is where the universities can play a role, where they can set up mini campuses in highlands. So mini Unimas, have executive courses, run it there, empower the societies and bring them back. And last but not least is the collaboration between Sarawak, and the countries or cities nearby to it. Singapore is just one of them. We need to go to Taiwan. I've been to Taiwan and based as a visiting professor there. A lot that we can get from the Taiwanese. The Taiwanese now have a new policy, what they call as the Southern Policy. It is a governmental policy where Taiwan will reach out to as many Southeast Asian countries to develop capacities and to improve their universities and to also engage with their societies. So we need to reach out to them. Nobody here thinks about Taiwan. They always think about going to London. Right? So go to Taiwan. There's so many things that you can get from them, be it technology, and of course, we cannot forget the role of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is going to develop even further. Even under China, they're going to even expand. And the big brother China will always be there. There's no way you can neglect China now. Because as I spoke yesterday, 2 days ago with our good friend here who is on the board of director of ICAT, the Chinese have already bought so many lands in Sarawak. Not only for the sake of buying, but for the sake of developing. We need to relieve the Santubong idea of being connected with China, because the Chinese so-called influence in the world has expanded, and the US is now crumbling in many ways. And we need to see the shift, not only in power, but also in the development of local industries and other things. So I'm going to end here. Let's have like a bit more question and answer. We have how many minutes more?
Right. We have about 40 minutes.
Okay.
Just want to comment on a few things and then I'll open it up. The small idea that, number one, the concept of history is linear. So we went to school, as mentioned, history is linear. You move from one stage to another. You move from one. Thank you, Francis. So you move. History is linear you move from one stage to another. You look at the idea by Rousseau, for instance, or even Karl Marx. They look at the development of society from one stage to another. Rousseau talks about the 5 stages. Marx talks about the 6 stages. So everything is linear. If you want to, and they tell us, if you want to develop like Europe, you have to follow these certain stages. But your idea seems to project that actually history can be a cycle. Therefore we can learn from the past, because the things of the past it's not necessarily, they're not going to happen. Maybe they happen like in different manner. Maybe the color is blue instead of black a few years ago. So is this the kind of history that you are promoting or getting us into, so that we can look at our society in different manner?
Right. Yeah. So I'm not advocating the cyclical idea of history, because the problem with the cyclical idea of history, and a lot of pre-modern scholars or scholars in the early years use this concept, is that it assumes that a lot of things that have been done in the past will take shape in an almost exact manner in future. So it's almost like a history of providence, right? And I'm not saying that. I'm saying that history has patterns, and human behavior has certain patterns that recur in some ways through time, but adjust itself in the context by which they are in. What we need to do is to recognize some of these patterns. Why do states develop and why do states fall has to do with certain issues, and one of which is, of course, the force of economics. Right, the force of economics. How do you deal with your economics? How do you deal with your finance? And we need to learn from some of these things. Now, going back to Sarawak, the cyclical idea of history is not relevant, because the kind of civilizations that were there in the past had different shapes, different sizes, and different connections than what we have today. And therefore, the lessons that we take must be very, very selective. We cannot have another Santubong now, right? It's not going to be another Santubong, because we live in a highly industrial age, we live in an AI age. But what we can learn from Santubong, which is very, very important, is the ability and the openness to be connected, and also the propensity to learn. Every society, if you look at highly developed countries like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, what they call in the past as the tiger economies, is seen especially in their agility. They are agile and they are very adaptive. That was Santubo for many hundred years. They can change very quickly. And Singapore, because of its kiasu, kiasi, kia whatever, we are kia everything, right? We have a new prime minister, and I know him some way or another. We are very quick to knowing the trends. We study the trends very, very carefully. We don't take everything that is in the trend. We don't try to be trendy, but we innovate it. We don't imitate, as was mentioned just now. We learn from what the world is trying to do, and then we come up with something crazy. So be crazy. One thing about Singapore that is powerful is that it always tries to be absurd. Garden in the city, of which it's not really a garden. It's just a metal piece of thing and they put vines on it, and the world comes, what a beautiful garden it is. See? What is there in Singapore, really? What is there in Singapore? Botanic Gardens, which is a British legacy. Sentosa Island, right? Which they put the USS now, the playing place, like playground, a bit like Disneyland, and the Marina Bay Sands. Other than that, you only need 2 days to go to Singapore. It's over. It's nothing. But it has ideas. It is full of ideas. And it puts ideas into practice. And it uses other terrains to develop its ideas. So that's why Singapore once invested in the Shenzhen project, the big project in China. It didn't work out, but we used China as a frontier. Now it's working with Malaysia. What is Singapore trying to do with Malaysia? Sending school teachers. Right? Why are they sending school teachers there? English teachers. Singaporeans are going to teach Malaysian English. Right? And people are asking me, like, why is Singapore making this deal with Malaysia, sending teachers there? Singapore is not interested only with sending teachers to Malaysia. Teachers will be the soft diplomacy for us, to build the train, to invest in the northern region, and to get to Sarawak. Right? And this is how we learn from the past. Why? Because Singapore is very conscious that it had Temasek, which was a flourishing city. It learns from the lessons of Temasek. That's why it goes going back to history. It had the time of Raffles, who built an island which was forgotten into a major port city. And then it had Lee Kuan Yew as the leader. But Lee Kuan Yew has passed his time, he's no longer around. Now it has to invent an identity of its own. What will it be? The identity that Singapore has shown to the world now is that it is a very regionalized identity. It is not a country of its own, it is a country that is connected with the rest of the region, like Temasek. And this is how you learn from history. Some more? Yes.
Yes. Professor Dr. Syed, just like when I just want to give some ideas,
Excuse me, could you please introduce yourself? Mention your name, where you come from.
My name is
Professor Dr. Syed, good morning. My name is Pangeran Haji Ali. Okay. I just want to give my opinions after I observed from your speech. Actually, I love history, learn history in school. But only now I like to involve to know more about this history. History is where I involve in myself, like in NGO. So I see history is like this. History is actually learn for the future. What you just learn good history, you apply presently now for the future. So my work is like this. It's what we do not planning all these changes. It's all from history, isn't it? How the evolution of history is now applied now. So I think not much different, only the mindset. Mindset of us. mankind to apply it. So the good, for example, like Santupo, if I observe this from this story A, this and like this, so which is prevalent, which is okay, so to me history, we just get what's good about the history, and you apply it now for the next one. So good like this course, you know, you to us like this, it makes us think, and then at the end of the day, there's a relevancy that now reality now is how I think, like in harmony, like, you know, we learn history, live our life like this. So good, just my, I think to just my way for expression of my mind, I know. They love to, I just today I follow your course, your talk as well.
Okay.
I should follow more.
Thank you very much. I like to just extend on what you said, the mindset,
Yes.
right?
Actually, mindset,
Yeah, so I think the mindset has to change first. The problem with the mindset that we have, especially amongst the Malays, or Southeast Asians or Nusantarans, as we say now, is that we first tend to romanticize history. We like to romanticize it. Oh, last time we had Malacca Kingdom. What are they talking about? We are so powerful. Muslims are particularly good at this. Before they invented optics, we had Biruni, all these scholars that were pioneers. The question I always ask these people is, so what? So what? So what if you were great in the past? So the mindset is the problem here. First, they like to romanticize history. The second is, they always see history as an evolution of successes. So they only want to see good things. My grandfather was a good man. My great-grandfather was a penghulu kampung. We always see the good stories. But that is not history. Real history, and for us who are Muslims, there's a very beautiful verse in the Quran which goes like this: travel forth into the world and see what has happened to the people who deny the truth. The people also means civilization. Because the Quran tells us, as you travel into the world and see into the lives of civilizations, you see that while there are a lot of powerful civilizations, a lot failed. There's so many failed civilizations. So one mindset that we need to change is that we need to learn from failures. This is the problem that we have in Singapore. Everybody wants to get an A, nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to, as we say in Malay, membuka pekong di dada. That means, to translate that, to reveal the wounds. It's very powerful actually in Malay. There cannot be pekong in the dada, actually. But the Malays are saying, to reveal the wounds in your chest. In your chest. Di dada, on your chest, right? So the second thing, other than romanticizing and thinking more is that we must acknowledge the things that we have done wrong. And this is the hardest. Why is it the hardest? Because it reveals how the societies in the past did not achieve what we thought that they did. That's the second point, the mindset that needs to change.
No questions.
The third mindset that needs to be changed is the value placed on learning and relearning, which is a crisis of the academic. Ironically, professors are the last to relearn. I'm telling you now. People who are least educated can learn faster than the people who are most educated. The irony of this world today. They have a PhD, permanent head damage. It's over. They don't learn. They don't learn anything new. And this is why they don't innovate. What are the reasons why the Japanese, the Koreans, the tiger economies, the Europeans, Britain is in crisis now, the universities are tumbling down, right? They are closing down a lot of the small universities. It's suffering from major funding cuts because of this problem. That the intellectuals, the scholars think that they are out there. Come AI can write a book in 7 minutes, right? Now you have to relearn. So this is the other thing that we need to change. We need to relearn our history. We are refusing to do so. Relearning then requires us to have one trait that is always emphasized in Southeast Asian society. It's called tawadu or humility. Rendah hati. Rendah hati. Rendah hati is translated as humility. Rendah hati means to bring your heart down, not rendah diri. This is a wrong concept in the Malay worldview. Malay boleh say, saya ni rendah diri. There's no such thing as rendah diri. Rendah diri is a wrong way of looking at life. Rendah diri means you put yourself down. There is no such thing as putting yourself down. You are great creation. Human being is one of the greatest creation. You put your heart down. You bring yourself up. This is the mindset that I can do. Because within a lot of these tribes and communities that I see, they tend to bring themselves down. When they bring themselves down, they also look at their histories as not worthy to be told. Why should I tell the stories of my grandfather? My grandfather was just a farmer. In Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia, I always hear this. What's there to say about the Malays? Then they start to develop fictional stories. Kuntura, they say. That one of the prophets of God, Abraham, had another wife. What's the text? No text. What's the source? No source. How did you get this information? Because we Malays are great, we must be descended from one prophet. See, you need lies to develop a story of your own. But if you are rendah hati, you know that even if your grandfather is a farmer, he is a great man. Why? Can you be on the farm at 5 o'clock in the morning and work until 12 o'clock in the afternoon? Now I want to go to the Sarawak bridge. At 10 o'clock I don't want to go out. Why? It's too hot. So farmers are great people. Actually, peasants are great people because they can do great things with their hands. So we need to change this mindset on how we look at the past. Right? Sarawak? Yeah.
Yes, Abraham.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Abraham. Thank you for your presentation and the time spent yesterday as well. I had sort of one comment and one question. One comment is, or question is, when are you running for president? Because after your presentation, I feel I want to vote for you. So thank you. But that's just a funny way to say thank you. It's really inspiring. I guess the question, you kind of alluded to in your previous comments on the question, and coming back to this idea of your main sort of question, why we study history. So how do we measure as a society, the success of that we have a healthy understanding of history? I mean, you can take it in any direction. I mean, we have people from the academic institutions as well. What makes a successful history program? Is it the number of history graduates, or